Hey friends, hope you're well. So Mark Zuckerberg just put out a video where he talked through some of the changes in policy at Meta around freedom of speech. Now, there's a lot of implications in what he's saying, so I thought I'd put together a reaction video where I break the video down, share some thoughts and perspectives on what we're likely to see when it comes to social media in the next year or so. All right, so let's dig in.
Hey everyone. I want to talk about something important today because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years.
Not kidding.
There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political.
No kidding.
But there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation.
Man buns.
These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes.
Now, this I think is particularly interesting because Zuckerberg is obviously a leader in tech. He comes from an engineering background. He builds technology. And, I've worked in tech my entire career. And one of the things about engineers is engineers like building systems to solve problems, right? So what often happens is whether you're building a piece of software or you're building a business or you're building a workflow is as we wrap our heads around the problem more and more, we tend to build more and more complex systems that are more and more sophisticated to solve that particular problem, to make the software better, to make the business better, to make the workflow more efficient. And then at some point, what often happens is you kind of look at it and it's just this massive kind of ball of rubber bands, right? And you're like, how does this work? And is this really solving these problems? And that's when these systems start tending to make a bunch of these mistakes. But there are many, many engineers that I've worked with in my career where it's difficult to get them to take a step back and see that what they've built is actually a bit of a Frankenstein. So it's impressive that Zuck is saying this. This is kind of unusual. It's certainly not, completely unknown in tech, but it's kind of unusual for someone like him running a company like Meta to take a step back and say, we've built these super complicated systems and they're making a bunch of mistakes and we want to fix it.
Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people.
Now that I think is a really important point. There's a lot of waffling and arguing and bickering about the role of social media companies in our world, right? There's a lot of people who just absolutely hate Mark Zuckerberg and hate Elon Musk and hate all of these people who are building these social media platforms and they think they suck and they think they're biased and they think they're wrong and they think they're bad for our kids' health and all that kind of stuff. I get it. But one of the bits of sympathy that I have towards, or some of the sympathy that I have towards some of these companies, is they're dealing with a monumental challenge that human beings have never dealt with before, right? If you think about Zuckerberg, and to be very clear, I'm not a super fan by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's made some terrible mistakes in his career, but I fundamentally think he's a decent guy, but he's made some bad decisions. But like all of us, I mean, who hasn't made bad decisions in our lives? And as we get older and we learn how the world works more, and we have more insight, more perspectives, then we change and hopefully make better decisions. But think about him when he created Facebook all those years ago, and then the entire world and their dog decided to start using it. Then you dealt with the first time in human history where you have that many people all communicating together, all of which have got different views and different perspectives, and they come from different backgrounds, and they're speaking different languages, and they've got different ideas, and they've got different views of like what's offensive and what's inoffensive, and somehow you've got to figure out how all that stuff works. And a tiny change in one of these social media platforms has implications for tens of millions of people all over the world, right? That is a really hard problem to solve. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy that, it's not like these people have got all of the right ideas and they're deliberately trying to do bad things. I think certainly there's been bad things that have happened in the running of some of these social media platforms, but I think we should also have some empathy to these are just really hard problems to solve.
And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship.
Interesting that he uses the word censorship there, because I would never have, I'm not a betting man, but I would never have bet that Zuckerberg will be coming out using the word censorship multiple times in a video like this. It's interesting. I'd like to understand what his view of censorship is within this context. Like, is he deliberately stating that the policies that is implemented at Meta are actively censoring people, or is it that these policies are protecting people? Like, is it protection or is it censorship? I just think that's a really interesting question to ask. And it's obviously both, right? But I just think it's interesting that he's using that word. I bet his PR team hated the fact that he was using the word censorship.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech.
There's no doubt about that. I should take a moment to just, in the interest of full disclosure, disclose my kind of political perspectives here, because if I was a super left-leaning person reviewing this video and responding to it, it's going to be a very different set of views to if I was a super right-leaning person. By the way, for you, I'm leaning in the wrong direction. Hang on, left is this way, which is my right. Right is this way. This is cameras are confusing. Anyway, for my entire life, I've been right down the middle independent. I'm not a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. I am a US citizen. I can become a registered Democrat or Republican, and I vote in the elections. But I evaluate both sides for the good and the bad. I think there's some great stuff on the left with the Democrats, and I think there's some utter idiocy on the left. I think there's some great stuff on the right with the Republicans. I think there's some utter idiocy on the right as well. So whenever I'm kind of evaluating politics, I'm just looking at it for what it is. I'm just not willing to subscribe to picking a side. And some people really don't like the fact that I have that viewpoint. And I don't blame you if you disagree with me vehemently on that. My view is that all the things that we talk about in politics, the social issues, the economic issues, the societal issues, the implications and the depth of those topics is so complicated that I don't think you can pick one side that just nails it and everything, like that is going to be great for social issues and economic issues and freedom of speech and all these different pieces. In my view, is like this side's good for that bit, this side's good for that bit, this side's good for that bit. It's kind of like pick a mix. I want to pull all the different pieces together, and I'm going to have different viewpoints in that. So I just don't generally subscribe to one or the other side. One thing I will say though that relates to what he's saying here, where he says, there's been more of a focus on freedom of speech, is I have many, many criticisms of Donald Trump. I think he sets a terrible example for our kids. And I don't like the way he's dragged discourse down in our society. But one of the things I think Donald Trump has actually done a good thing about in doing is really highlighting media bias. We always kind of knew that, CNN was a little bit liberal, Fox was a little bit conservative, right? But Donald Trump really popularized the term fake news, where there was a lot of the news that was being reported was actually just opinion that was packaged up as news. And I think that was a good thing, right? I think in many cases what he was saying was fake news actually wasn't fake news. But overall, I think he zoned in on the fact that there is a legacy media out there. Zuckerberg uses the word legacy media a bunch of times in this video, which I think is kind of funny. But it's true, like people don't go to those news networks as much as they used to, and they are getting their news from Facebook and Threads. I was going to say Threads, not Threads, and Instagram and X and all these different places. So that media has become something of a legacy media. So that means that there is more and more of a responsibility for us to get accurate information on these different social media networks. But I do credit Donald Trump for shining a light on the fact that there is a lot of media bias, and it's something we needed to talk about and to resolve.
So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US.
I would love to have been a fly on the wall when he was talking to his PR team and he said, we're going to get rid of fact checkers. That's going to make any PR person quiver in their boots. That's because that becomes the headline, right? But I like that he's being so blunt about this. I think that's a good thing, that he's saying like, we're not going to, dress up what we're doing here. It's going to tell you what we're actually going to do. In the same way that I think it was good that Elon did the whole Twitter files thing, right? There was a lot of criticism around Twitter, and he said, let's just open up all the internal files and we'll have some journalists report on it. And Matt Taibbi is a great journalist, and he reported on it, right? I think sunlight is always the best disinfectant here, and honesty is always the best policy.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth.
But you kind of became the arbiters of truth, didn't you, Zuck?
But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially...
I'm not sure I would say that fact checkers have destroyed more trust than they've created. I think that it depends on where you're getting your facts from and whether they're, actual facts. If I see that, let me think of it. If I see that InfoWars has fact-checked some things, like, sure, okay. Or if I see that MSNBC has fact-checked something, yeah, okay, fair enough, right? These are very much biased networks. I mean, InfoWars goes a whole way step further than MSNBC, but you get what I'm saying. So to me, I think it's been good that we've had a culture of something happens and then some people go and fact check it. We just need a high quality of fact checking. I don't think necessarily that fact checking is a bad thing. We just need better fact checking, and we need it to be objective, and it needs to be cited, and we need those citations to be listed in the fact checking as well. Not just somebody saying, well, this thing sounds about right,
Especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second,
let's talk about community notes for a second. So this is very interesting to me because when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, he basically fired their trust and safety team, which was allegedly responsible for a lot of the quote-unquote censorship on X, where various accounts were kicked off, certain news stories weren't given enough prominence on Twitter, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's been written about all of that. But what he did is he started this project called Community Notes. Or, well, let me reframe that. There used to be something, I think it was called Birdseed or Birdsong or something like that, that was kind of the first early version of Community Notes. And he basically doubled down on that, called it Community Notes. And the basic idea is that people can join the Community Notes program. When somebody posts something on X, you can go in there, you can add clarity to that. It's called community noting something. So, Elon could go on there and say, dogs are better than cats, right? And somebody could go on there and community note it and leave some references that will share a particular perspective that relate to that claim, right? And there's a mixture of voting, and there's a complexity around how those community notes then basically get prominence and they appear underneath the main post. Now, overall, I think this is a great problem to solve. Have we solved this problem? No, we haven't, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen to make community notes better. But overall, I think this is a good problem to solve, right? It's a democratized system. It applies context, which I think is super important. Like, what I want to see is, when somebody goes and says something that is clearly nonsense, I want to see people not just saying this is nonsense, but sharing citations from respectable publications and data that identifies and illustrates the fact that that is nonsense, right? And that's kind of what community notes is really there and intended to do. So to me, this is the right problem to solve. The problem with it is that community notes are super slow, right? So if somebody goes and posts something, like Elon goes and posts, his 2000th post of the day, like that guy is like just never ending posts, right? And by the time the community note system has had an opportunity to do its thing and apply the context and it gets community noted, whatever, that process to complete, that post is now ancient. Nobody's paying attention to it anymore, because on social media, certainly on platforms like X, everything is happening so in the moment that you need to be able to speed up the system. And you also have the risk of brigading, where let's say CNN go and make some claim about something, and then a right-winger goes and says, actually, this is incorrect, or conservative goes and says that this is incorrect. You then maybe get a bunch of people who then go and brigade that, so the community note then doesn't appear. This happens a ton on Reddit, and it happens with left-wing people and right-wing people brigading. It happens all the time, where, on Reddit, for example, some of the most insightful, interesting posts that disagree or challenge the perspectives of the subreddit community will get downvoted into oblivion and they just won't be seen, right? So what often happens is it develops an echo chamber. And to me, I think what he's getting at here is that our society's developed into a bit of an echo chamber in recent years. And I agree that that is a problem that we need to solve. So to me, the approach to community notes is the right way to do it. What I want to see is that this is a big open source project with multiple social media companies contributing together. I want to see X, I think if I remember correctly, like Elon has put out and X have put out a bunch of open source stuff that relates to their algorithm and community notes and things like that. Given how invested in open source Meta are, I want to see Meta and X collaborating together on this. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, big open source fans. That's what I would love to see, right? Is that happening? Because this to me is not about one product being better than the other. This is in service of human beings and how we consume and engage with each other. This to me is a humanitarian problem to solve, not a product problem to solve.
We're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse.
I thought that was particularly interesting, that he's highlighting immigration and gender that are, quote, out of touch with mainstream discourse. I don't really understand what he means by that. I don't know whether he's saying, you know, everybody who's bickering on these different platforms, all they're talking about is immigration and gender, or whether it's that there's a lot of misinformation and bias and, you know, just incorrect, you know, facts, I guess you could say, non-truthiness, as the Colbert Report would say, within those two particular topic areas. I don't know why I highlighted those two specifically. I'd be curious to see what it'd say to that.
What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far.
Now, I totally agree with him on this, and maybe this is the context that he's using immigration and gender around, which is, you know, in the interests of being more inclusive with immigration and with gender, that some people have kind of have been playing that on hardcore mode and become almost militant in their viewpoints and their perspectives. And I definitely agree with this, right? Like, as I said to you earlier on, you know, I'm politically right down the middle, but one of the areas where I'm very left-wing is socially, right? Like, I'm a big believer in just live and let live. Live your life the way you want to live it. Live your life the way you want to live it. And I'm all in favor of people having freedom to live their lives in an open and transparent capacity, right? Like, all about gay marriage and trans rights, all that kind of stuff, thumbs up. But there's no doubt that I think as people get invested in a mission and in a movement, sometimes people can become puritanical about it. And I've seen like good people who are very much in favor of that mission and that movement get shut down because somebody else is, you know, is trying to appear even more virtuous than them. And it's such a silly thing to do. Like, to me, what's most important is we're moving society forward, not that we're trying to appear more pure than anybody else. So I think he's definitely highlighting something very relevant here.
So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms. Third,
now, what I think he's saying there is share our beliefs and their experiences on the platforms. I think what he's basically saying is, irrespective of whether you are, let's take a topic like trans rights, irrespective of whether you are in favor of trans rights or whether you're not in favor of trans rights, you should be able to have those conversations on these platforms. And as a general rule, I agree with that. Like, I'm a big believer that the response to bad speech is better speech and more of it, right? Like, I'm not a big fan of shutting conversations down. Now, of course, where this gets complicated is when it comes down to hate speech. And what I find interesting about this, given the fact that Zuck is so invested in AI, is there's no talk of AI in any of this, right? Is that I think we can build AI models that can actually do a really good job of being able to identify the subtleties in having a respectful, vigorous debate where reasonable people will have a reasonable conversation versus somebody being hateful, right? And I think all too often what you see in these big hot button topics like immigration and gender is you just get the hardliners just arguing with each other, right? And I don't think people want to see that. So I love the idea of bringing more nuance to the platform. I just think we need to be able to do it in a way that where we can detect the hate speech. But again, then there needs to be a conversation about what do you define as hate speech, right? And to me, I tend to think of hate speech as just the goal of hate speech is to do harm to another person, right? It's to strip somebody of their dignity, of their rights, of their freedom, right? I think of that as being, kind of hate speech. But I'm not an expert on this, so don't listen to me.
We're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action.
Now, that is interesting. High severity and illegal content and actions. Illegal seems relatively straightforward to kind of define. It's going to be whatever's illegal within a particular geography or jurisdiction, right? And there's a whole load of complexity that kind of goes into that, right? Like there are some parts of the world where you cannot openly post that you're gay on the internet, right? And there are some parts of the world, well, most parts of the world I'd like to think, where that's totally fine to post that you're gay on the internet. So there is complexity there, but I get legal. But I think you said, was it high severity, something like that? I'd be curious to see how they define that. And again, this is why I want to see an open source, collaborative initiative between where, I want to see Elon and Zuck put their comprehensive genius together with some super smart people to identify systems and policies in how this gets cracked. Because I have no doubt that this is a solvable problem. But this is the thing. This kind of view that reporting is for, will be used for everything else, that's not going to work. That is just not going to work because one, you're going to need a particular reporting threshold. So if somebody posts some just horrible, hateful, nasty stuff that you would never want to be on there, it doesn't trigger their automated kind of illegal and high severity thing. Then it's going to require a certain threshold of people reporting that. And that doesn't always happen. Or again, you then face the risk of brigading where somebody posts something that's actually reasonable. It might ruffle some feathers, but it's very courteous and respectful. It may challenge a viewpoint, but then a bunch of people brigade it, they report it, and then it gets taken down. And that I see happening a ton with my friends on Facebook, right? I see a lot of people who are very decent human beings who then say, I just got out of Facebook jail because that happened, right? So reporting is not going to work, right?
The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms.
I don't know if that's true. I hope that it reduces censorship. I think censorship overall is bad. I think hate speech is bad too, and we need to figure out where the line is. But I'm not sure if this particular section on this new approach to policy violations is going to work. I think we need more information to be able to determine that.
We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down.
Now, I think that's also super interesting because how often do you ever hear someone like Zuck in his position saying, you know what? We're going to see more bad stuff appearing on this social media network, but it's a trade-off between that and a lot of really decent stuff kind of leaving it. Not getting visibility on that particular network. What I find really interesting about this is that when Elon bought X, there was all of this like fire and brimstone about like X is going to be driven into the ground and blah, 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 blah. And from what I can tell, X has generally been ticking along and doing reasonably well, right? At least from what I can see. One of the problems with X is that it is just unwielding, or in its just the sheer ferocity of the content that's on there. It can be just exhausting. And Elon talks a lot about unregretted user minutes, right? He wants to keep the level of unregretted user minutes high on X. In other words, that people find the experience really pleasurable and enjoyable and worthwhile. That is not the experience of X right now for me. I use the you know, the feed in X where you see the For You feed where you see people who X thinks you'll be interested in. And there's so much fighting and bickering on there. It's kind of unpleasant. And I don't see as much of that on Facebook. And I don't really use Instagram as much. So to me, I worry that Zuck is going to actually end up turning it a little bit into X. So they've got to be super careful in how they do this.
Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again.
It's interesting that they said, you know, people told us that they didn't want to see as much politics, so we just stopped recommending this. That in itself is a red flag to me. It's like, I don't want you, Meta, Facebook, making a decision on what people do and don't want to see. To me, your sole responsibility, and I think this is what Zuck is getting towards, your sole responsibility is to keep horrible, illegal, hateful stuff off the platform. And then open up the rest of it to discussion and debate where reasonable people can have reasonable discussions. And there'll be a lot of unreasonable people having unreasonable discussions as well. So it was interesting that I think that he highlighted that, yeah, we just switched that stuff off because people didn't like it. I guess it shows the power that they have.
So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive.
How are you going to do that? How are you going to keep it friendly and positive? I think one of the challenges here is that the discourse that we've had in politics in the last, I'd say, 5 to 8 years has been pretty toxic. People are just arguing. I think the key thing that X and Meta needs to do to solve this problem is to, and I think this is where AI will actually be really helpful, is that we need to rise up reasonable, respectful, courteous, informative, educational, and entertaining content. The people who are shouting and arguing and clickbaiting people that are not doing anything that's hateful and not doing anything that is illegal, that's the stuff that you want to start hiding. If you're going to have an algorithm, then what we need to do is we need, you know, these algorithms, people will game the algorithms, right? If somebody knows that the algorithm is optimized for this particular thing, then more people will behave that way, right? So if suddenly the meta algorithms in Threads and Facebook and Instagram was, oh, if you're really friendly and respectful and courteous, you get more views, it will massively change the quality of the discourse on those platforms. So to me, that's what we need to do, is just saying like, oh, we just hope that people will be friendly and positive. That's not going to work. I don't think Zuck's saying that, but that's just not going to work.
Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas.
Now, I thought this was surprising and unusual and interesting. Carry on, Zuck, and then I'll share a thought.
As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to...
Texas. Okay. I mean, yeah, Austin, I get that, right? To me, the geographical location here is, it's all optics, right? There is a perception in the world that people in California are all, you know, yoga doing, tofu eating, you know, sandal wearing hippie lefties, right? And it's not true, right? I live in California. I live in the Bay Area. But the perspective of a lot of people in Texas is that they're kind of like, you know, rootin', tootin', gun owning, you know, kind of conservative, God-fearing, you know, down-to-earth Americans, right? Like, to me, the geography is kind of irrelevant here. If you're hiring a bunch of people who are infusing a bias into the system, it's bad hiring. Hire better people. Fire your HR team and hire better people. I think you should have when you're hiring these people who have got these content moderation jobs, I think a great service would be if you basically have almost like a public stipulation of what these folks agree to, almost like a constitution of how they operate their job, right? That is maybe publicly posted. I don't think you should post their individual salaries or their work or anything like that. But I think that I see this as a role that's kind of in service of human beings, right? And to me, the way in which you solve that is to hire better human beings and have a more rigorous process in which you weed out bias, right? It's not like all of the, magistrates and judges are all in one location where everybody's ultimately objective. They're scattered all over the world, right? But ideally, what goes into becoming a magistrate or a judge or a justice is that you can demonstrate objectivity, right? So to me, this is just odd. I think this is more optics than anything is. I think they're probably getting a bunch of flag of like, oh, there's just a bunch of Californian hippies who are deciding what goes onto, onto Instagram and Facebook, and no one cares about threads, but you get what I'm saying. So this seems a little odd to me, but I like the fact that they're weeding out bias. What I want to see is, I don't really care about where they live. What are you going to do to provide public assurance that these people are objective?
We're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there.
I do worry a little bit about this. I don't want to turn this into a video that's all about kind of, the state of governments and impacting freedom of speech. It's just not my area of expertise. But I love the idea, for example, that Europe is that they've shaken Apple, for example, to require USB-C on all of these different devices. It's going to cut a lot of environmental waste, blah, 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 blah. But I like the idea of consistency and accessibility of standards and formats. What I don't like is when governments dictate technology. I don't like the fact that Europe has dictated USB-C. What I wanted them to do was to dictate that there should be a standard format that everybody's used, and then the industry can figure out what's the best technology for that, So I get the gist of what it's saying here. And look, at the end of the day, Meta, like it or not, are a massive force in the world. So the idea of working with the administration, whether it's the Democrats or whether it's the Republicans, to make sure that we can maintain freedom of speech, I think is a good thing.
Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country.
Well, not just you. So a lot of people get censored in China.
The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship. By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further.
Now, that's interesting. There's a whole topic around, what exactly is the government been doing when it comes to social media. I think what's happened here is a lot of the governments all over the world have identified that social media companies have a huge responsibility when it comes to people and young people and kids and access to information, and also the impact of that kind of stuff when it comes to elections. So I wouldn't frame it as like they've been trying to censor us. I don't think it's quite so simple to frame it that way. I think this is a collection of issues, of which, yes, active censorship is one of them, but I think there's a series of other very reasonable things that the government's been trying to do when it comes to social media. So he's kind of he's spinning it a little bit, I think.
But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove.
There's a lot of man buns on the internet. We should get rid of all of it.
But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
Wow, he sounded like a robot at the end. I'm not sure if you heard that, but he sounded like a bit of a robot. So overall, what's my take on this? I think he's on the right track. I think he's identifying the right problems to solve. I think these are obviously, and he will know this, Suck's a smart dude. These are big problems to solve. What I want to see moving forward, I think he's solving the right problem. I think freedom of speech is fundamentally important to how we evolve ideas and how we evolve society. And you know, to me, some of the greatest philosophers in the world are comedians, stand-up comedians. And why that happens is because of freedom of speech. But what I want to see is I want to see more industry collaboration as an open source project. I want to see community notes to be an industry thing where X and Meta and, you know, LinkedIn and all the other social media networks around the world are all collaborating on solving this particular problem. I also want to see AI used more comprehensively here, but with significant levels of adherence to certain very clearly defined policies. You know, I think there's an opportunity for there to be a constitution of sorts around what kind of content, you know, what content moderation looks like. I don't mean a literal constitution like the US Constitution, but essentially a set of policies that becomes kind of like a Creative Commons published work with technology that's open source that then gets plugged into these different systems. And then we solve all of this together, because I think there's great minds all over the world that can solve this. So I'm excited by this. It's going to be a journey, but I'm glad that we've got the CEOs of these companies focusing on this. I think this is going to be a good thing overall moving forward. Anyway, this was a long video. Thank you for watching. Speaking of social media, if you are struggling to come up with social media ideas, right? This happens to all of us at some point. Like, you know, when we're trying to post on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, like, how do I come up with a bunch of ideas that are interesting? We can sometimes wrap ourselves around the axle. If you go and check out this video over here, I'm going to show you my approach that I use to come up with a whole month's worth of social media content in just 3 or 4 hours, right? It's a really simple system. It's called buckets. I'm going to walk through it on that video, exactly how that works. I think it'll be super helpful. So go check out that video and I'll see you over there. Cheers.